I've watched a lot of people get torn apart in that room. It's a small room, cinderblock walls, one old air conditioner that rattled like it was chewing gravel, a long table scarred with coffee rings and knife marks from bored men. We called it the Annex. It sat at the back of a range complex out past the dry lake bed, an hour from anything, and the kind of men who ended up in that room thought they were the best shooters alive. Most of the time they weren't wrong. But I want to tell you about the afternoon nobody in that room ever forgot. The afternoon a quiet woman walked in, took the mockery without blinking, and then the commander said 5 words and the whole room went silent like somebody had switched off the air. I was the range cadre back then, Master Sergeant Doyle. My job was to run the evaluations, score the shooters, and stay out of the politics. I'd been doing it long enough that I'd stopped being impressed by big shoulders and loud mouths. Bothered me a little sometimes how much faith men put in their own voices. The good ones, the really good ones, were usually the quiet ones in the corner. I should have remembered that better than I did, because I almost made the same mistake everyone else made. Let me set it up for you. It was the second week of a joint advanced marksmanship evaluation. Best shooters from a handful of units, all funneled into our little desert outpost to prove they belonged in the top tier. The desert in that part of the world doesn't mess around. By 10 in the morning the heat came off the ground in waves you could see. The wind out there was a liar. It would lie flat and dead at the firing line and then twist sideways 300 yards downrange where you couldn't feel it. Men who shot beautifully on a calm day fell apart out there. The range humbled people, that was the point of it. That morning was hotter than usual. I remember the coffee tasting burnt, the way it always did from the old percolator, and I remember the smell of gun oil and dust and somebody's cheap cologne, too much of it in that closed-up room. The cologne belonged to Tanner Cobb. You've met a Cobb, everybody's met a Cobb. Big, good-looking in a hard way, loud in a way that filled a room before he even sat down. He was a genuinely gifted shooter, I'll give him that. I have to give him that to be fair to the story. He'd won the unit competition 2 years running and he carried it around like a crown. He sat at the head of the table like he owned it. His buddies laughed at everything he said, even the things that weren't jokes. So the room was loud. 8, 9 men, all riding high, trading stories about shots they'd made, shots they'd missed by a hair, the way men do. And then the door opened and the noise dropped a little, the way it does when a stranger walks in. She wasn't much to look at, if I'm honest. That's a terrible thing to say, but I'm telling you exactly what I thought because I want you to understand how wrong I was. She was small, maybe 5'6", lean, the kind of lean that comes from work and not from a gym mirror. Plain face, dark hair pulled back tight, eyes that didn't go anywhere they didn't need to go. She had a worn rifle case over her shoulder and she carried it like it weighed nothing, like it was part of her arm. Nobody knew her, that was the first strange thing. By the second week we all knew each other, at least by face. She'd been pulled in late, special invitation and nobody had been told why. Her name on the roster just said Vance A. No unit listed. That was the second strange thing, but at the time it just looked like a mistake. She found an empty chair near the wall, set her case down gently and sat. Didn't introduce herself, didn't try to, just folded her hands and waited. Cobb looked at her for a second too long, then he smiled and I knew exactly what kind of smile it was. "You lost, sweetheart," he said, "admin's down the hall." A couple of the guys laughed, easy laughs. She didn't react, didn't smile, didn't scowl. She just looked at him, this flat, steady look like she was reading the wind off him, then she looked away like he wasn't worth the rest of her attention. That more than anything set Cobb off. Men like him can stand being hated, they can't stand being ignored. "No, seriously," he said, louder now, leaning back so the chair creaked. "This is the eval room, you sure you got the right place? This is for shooters." He said the word like it had a fence around it. "I'm in the right place," she said, quiet voice, no edge to it, that was all she gave him. The room loved that. They thought it was funny, this little woman who wouldn't fight back, this easy target. Somebody muttered something about a diversity checkbox just loud enough to carry and the laughter went around again. I should have shut it down, I was the cadre, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't because some small, ugly part of me was wondering the same thing they were. What was she doing here? Who let her in? Whether she'd embarrass herself out on the line in front of everybody and we'd all have to pretend we hadn't seen it. I'm not proud of that. I'm telling you because it's true and because the whole point of this story is that I was wrong and so was everybody else, and the woman by the wall already knew it and didn't bother to argue. She just sat there and let them talk. You learn a lot watching how a person handles being underestimated. Some people inflate. They puff up, talk faster, try to prove on the spot that they belong. Those people you can predict. Then there are the rare ones who go still, who let the noise wash over them like rain on a rock. Vance was a rock. She sat with her hands folded and her face quiet and she let Cobb burn himself out, and the longer she did it, the more uneasy I got, though I couldn't have told you why. It was like standing next to a dog that isn't barking. The quiet ones are the ones that bite. Cobb wasn't done, of course, he was performing for the room. "Tell you what," he said, "we got the cold bore challenge this afternoon. You ever heard of a cold bore? First round out of a cold barrel, no warm-up, no second chance, separates the real ones from the tourists." He grinned around the table. "Maybe you sit and watch how it's done, take notes, yeah." "All right," she said. Just that, all right, like she was agreeing to watch the weather. I saw something flicker across her face then. Not anger, something closer to patience. The patience of somebody who's been here before in rooms like this with men like this and who has stopped expecting it to go any other way. And I remember thinking, and this is the part that stuck with me for years, I remember thinking she looked tired. Not weak tired. Tired the way a person gets when they've already proven themselves 100 times and the world keeps asking them to do it again. Outside, the wind picked up. I could hear it scratching sand against the cinder block. I glanced at the window and the heat shimmer was thick over the range. Bad shooting weather, honest weather, the kind that doesn't care who you are. The door opened again, and this time the whole room came to its feet. Commander Brandt walked in. If you didn't know him, you'd have walked past him on the street. Medium build, gray coming in at the temples, a face that didn't waste expressions. SEAL 20-some years, the kind of operator whose name got said quietly because the loud stories about him were the ones he'd never confirm. He ran the evaluation. When Brandt walked into a room, the temperature of it changed. Cobb sat up straight and lost the grin. Brandt set a folder on the table. He looked around at all of us, slow, taking inventory. His eyes passed over Cobb without stopping. They stopped on the woman by the wall. "And here's the thing," he nodded at her, small nod, the kind you give somebody you know. She nodded back. I watched Cobb's face change, just a flicker of it, the first little crack in all that confidence. Because Brandt didn't nod at people for no reason, and whatever was going on here, Cobb suddenly wasn't sure he was on the right side of it. Brandt opened the folder. "Cold bore challenge this afternoon," he said. "1 round, 1 target, 600 meters, wind's going to fight you, you'll shoot in the order I call." He paused. "We've got a guest evaluator joining the lane today, some of you will want to pay attention." Nobody said a word, the air conditioner rattled on. I looked at the woman by the wall. She hadn't moved, but there was the smallest change in her now, like a current switching on under still water. She reached down and rested one hand on her rifle case, light, the way you'd touch the shoulder of an old friend. And I thought, oh. I didn't know yet, not really, but some part of me had started to understand that the joke in this room had never been on her. It was on us. 600 meters doesn't sound like much until you've tried it cold. Let me explain it the way I'd explain it to my own kids. When a barrel is cold, first shot of the day, no warm-up rounds, the metal behaves a little differently than it does once it's hot. The first round out of a cold bore can land in a slightly different place than every shot after it. Good shooters chase that. They learn their own rifle so well that they know where that first cold round is going to go before they ever touch the trigger. It's not about being strong. It's not about being fast. It's about knowing one thing so completely that you can bet your reputation on it under pressure, in front of people who want to watch you fail. Add wind that twists 300 yards downrange where you can't feel it. Add heat shimmer that makes the target dance in the scope like it's underwater. Add a crowd of men who'd rather see you miss. That's the cold bore challenge. We went out to the line in the early afternoon, the worst possible time, which was the point. The sun was straight overhead and merciless. The mirage came up off the dirt in shimmering sheets. Out at 600 meters, the steel target was a small pale rectangle that wobbled and swam every time you tried to hold on it. Even looking at it through the spotting scope made your eyes ache. The men shot first. Brandt called them in his own order, and most of them did fine being a relative word out there. A couple of clean hits, a couple of misses that kicked up dust low and left, the wind eating the rounds the way it does. Each shooter walked back from the line a little quieter than he'd walked up. The desert was doing its work. Then Brandt called Cobb. "Now I'll be square with you." Cobb could shoot. He settled in behind that rifle and you could see the talent in him, the economy of it, no wasted movement. He read the wind off the flags, off the mirage, took his time. The whole line went quiet for him because everybody knew this was the favorite, the 2-time champ, and they wanted to see the standard set. He fired. The round hit, low edge of the plate, right side, but a hit. The steel rang and the spotter called it, and Cobb stood up grinning like he'd just won the thing all over again. His buddies whooped. He'd shot a clean cold bore at 600 in bad wind and bad light, and that's a real thing, that's a thing to be proud of, and he knew it, and he made sure everybody else knew it too. He walked back past the woman, Vance, sitting on an ammo crate in the shade with her case still zipped, and he couldn't help himself. "Edge of the plate 600 cold," he said. "Your turn, sweetheart, no pressure," and he laughed, and a few of them laughed with him. She looked up at him, and for the first time all day she smiled, just a little. It wasn't a nice smile. It wasn't mean either. It was the smile of somebody who has finally been invited to do the one thing they're better at than anybody in the room. "Thanks for warming it up," she said. Then Brant's voice cut across the line, flat and clear, and these are the words. These are the 5 words I told you about, the ones the whole room would carry around for the rest of their lives. "Iron Wolf Sniper, you're up." I want you to understand what happened to that line of men when he said it. You have to understand that Iron Wolf wasn't a nickname you handed out. It was a call sign, and not the cute kind. There were stories about Iron Wolf, stories that floated through units like smoke. A shooter who'd held an overwatch position alone for 2 days during an operation that went bad, who covered a withdrawal that should have been a slaughter and turned it into a survival, who put rounds where they had to go in conditions that no manual covered. Nobody in that room had ever seen Iron Wolf. Most of them half believed the call sign was a legend somebody made up to scare new shooters. And Brant had just looked at the small, quiet woman on the ammo crate and called her by it. The laughing stopped, all of it at once like a switch. Cobb's grin died on his face slow, the way ice melts. I watched the understanding crawl over the whole line of them, man by man, as they connected the woman they'd been mocking all morning to the name they'd been telling stories about for years. Somebody actually said it under his breath, "No way," and nobody answered him, because everybody was looking at her now, and she'd already stood up and unzipped her case. I've replayed that silence 100 times. It wasn't a respectful silence, not yet. Respect she'd have to earn the hard way in the next 90 seconds in front of the men who'd called her a tourist. It was the silence of 9 men realizing all at once that they'd misread the most important thing in the room, and that they were about to watch the proof of it, and that there was nothing they could do now but stand there and see. She took out her rifle. It was nothing fancy. A working rifle, scarred, well-kept, the kind of equipment a person doesn't replace because they know exactly how it talks to them. She carried it to the line the way she'd carried the case, like part of her own body. She didn't look at Cobb. She didn't look at any of them. She looked downrange at the heat coming off the dirt, at the flags hanging dead and then twitching, at the steel plates swimming in the mirage 600 meters out. I came up beside her with the spotting scope because that was my job, to call her shot. Up close she was even calmer than she'd looked across the room. There was a stillness coming off her that I can only describe as total. Her breathing slowed. Her hands were loose. She wasn't psyching herself up. She wasn't performing, she was just reading. "Wynn's lying to you at the line," I said, quiet, because I felt like I should say something. "Picks up downrange." "I know," she said, not rude, just a fact. "It always does." She settled behind the rifle. I watched through the scope. The mirage was boiling. The plate looked like it was underwater, drifting left, drifting right. I couldn't have called a clean hold on it to save my life. I could feel the men behind us holding their breath. I could hear the wind scratching the sand and the rattle of the generator and nothing else. And then I noticed something that I have never forgot. She waited. Most shooters take the wind they're given. The good ones wait for the wind they want. She lay there, finger off the trigger, eyes downrange, and she let the seconds stack up. 10, 15, 20. Cobb shifted behind us, impatient, but he didn't dare say a word now. She was reading the cycle of the wind, the breathing of it, the way it gusted and fell and gusted again. She was waiting for the lie to come around to the truth. I watched her chest rise and fall and rise and stop, soft at the bottom of a breath. The flags went slack just for a second, a little window in the wind, a heartbeat of honest air. And in that heartbeat she fired. The shot was so clean I almost missed it. There was no drama in it. That's the thing nobody tells you about the real ones, there's no drama in it. No held breath and grimace, no shoulder thrown into it. Just a soft crack, the rifle barely moving, her body absorbing it like she'd known exactly how much there was going to be. And then a long, long pause, the round flying out across 600 meters of shimmering dead air while every man on that line stood frozen. I had the steel plate in the spotting scope. I watched it. The round took it dead center. Not the edge, not low and left where the wind had been pulling everybody all afternoon, where it had pulled Cobb's celebrated shot. Center, right in the heart of the plate. The steel rang out across the desert, a clean high note, and a little spray of dust kicked up behind it where the round carried on into the berm. For a second nobody said anything. The note hung in the air and faded. Then I called it because that was my job, and I heard my own voice come out rougher than I meant it to. Center hit 600, cold bore. The silence broke, not into cheering, into something else. A kind of low murmur, men turning to each other, men saying things like, "Did you see that?" and "dead center cold in that wind." There was a sound a crowd makes when it has just watched something it didn't think was possible, and it isn't a happy sound exactly. It's closer to awe with a little fear mixed in. Vance was already breaking the rifle down. She hadn't even looked at the plate. She'd known, the way you know a key fits the lock before you've turned it. She'd read the wind, waited for the window, sent the round, and moved on, because to her it wasn't a miracle, it was Tuesday. "I want to tell you about Cobb, because the way he handled it is the reason I think about him kindly even now. He could have walked off. Men like him usually do. They find a reason, they get small and quiet, and they disappear, and they tell a different version of it later. Cobb didn't. He stood there for a long moment with his jaw working, and then he walked over to where she was zipping up her case, and the whole line watched him do it, and he stuck out his hand. That," he said, and his voice cracked a little, "was the best shot I've ever seen. And I've been telling myself I was the best in this room for 2 years." She looked at his hand, then she took it. "You're a good shooter," she said, and here's the part, she meant it. There wasn't an ounce of triumph in it. "Your cold bore in that wind was a hard shot and you made it look easy. I just had a few more bad days than you've had. That's all the difference is in the end. Bad days, you either learn from them or they break you." Cobb nodded. He didn't trust himself to say more. He let go of her hand and stepped back, and something in him had changed, and I think it was a good change. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a gifted person is to meet somebody better and find out they're not a god after all, just a person who paid a steeper price. Later, in the shade behind the line while the others reset the targets, I sat down next to her with 2 cups of that terrible burnt coffee and handed her one. She took it with a nod. "Iron Wolf," I said. "I figured that was a story somebody made up." She huffed something that was almost a laugh. "Most of it is," she said. "Stories grow. You hold a hill for one bad night, and by the time it gets back to the schoolhouse you held it for a week against an army." She turned the coffee in her hands. "It wasn't a week, it was one night, and I wasn't brave. I was just the only one left who could do the job, so I did it. There's a difference between brave and being out of other options. People don't like to hear that." I asked her why she'd let them mock her all morning, why she hadn't said a word, hadn't pulled rank, hadn't shut Cobb down the second he opened his mouth. She could have, she had every right. She thought about it for a while. The wind had calmed and the heat was settling, and out on the range the steel rang as somebody else took their shot. "Because it doesn't matter," she finally said. "What a room thinks of you before you've done anything, it doesn't matter. You can't argue a man like that out of his opinion. You can't talk your way into respect. You either do the thing or you don't." She took a sip of the coffee and grimaced at it. "And honestly, let them talk. Every minute they spend underestimating you is a minute you can spend reading the wind. They were watching the flags. I was watching the wind behind the flags. That's the whole game." I've thought about that line for 15 years. They were watching the flags. I was watching the wind behind the flags. She finished the coffee, stood up, slung her case over her shoulder, and that was it. No speech, no victory lap. Brant drove her out the same afternoon. She had somewhere to be, the kind of somewhere nobody asked about, and the dust settled behind the truck and she was gone like she'd never been there at all. But she had been there. You could feel it in that room for the rest of the evaluation. Cobb shot quieter and better. The mockery dried up. Men who'd spent the morning measuring each other by their voices started measuring themselves by something else. Sometimes one person walking through a room and doing the impossible without bragging about it does more to change men than 100 speeches. I run a different kind of work now. I'm older, my eyes aren't what they were. I couldn't make that shot on my best day with a tailwind and a prayer. But I tell young shooters about her, not to scare them, to teach them the one thing she taught me without ever trying to. The loudest person in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. The quiet one in the corner, the one taking the jokes without flinching, the one resting a hand on a worn rifle case like it's an old friend, watch that one. Because while everybody else is busy being right out loud, that one is reading the wind behind the flags. And when the moment comes, when somebody finally says you're up, they won't need to say a single word back. They'll just send one round straight through the center of everything that doubted them, and let the silence say the rest.